Yes. Okay, chapter 14. Yesterday we talked about population characteristics, right? But let's differentiate two terms first. One is population dynamics and the other one is population characteristics. For population dynamics, it's basically what they call this. It's an ancillary part of your, or a sub part of your ecology, which primarily deals with observation in the variation of population size and density for one or more species occupying a certain area. Okay. The other one is population characteristics, which primarily reflects or describes a population's age, gender, race, and ethnicity if we are referring to the human population. So, both describe the population under study. So for now, I would like everybody to focus more on your 6. Okay? So, out of those 6, we are going to talk about the ones with the formula, and these are your population density, dispersion, and population growth. So basically, let's review. A population is a group of organisms of a single species living within an area, a specific area. It shows, it's the most direct way of showing the gene pool of the species. Because naturally, you can't expect or you can't define a certain species based on only one organism. Right? So it has to be collectively at least a sample of the organisms of the certain species to identify its gene pool. There are 6 of these population characteristics we learned yesterday. And again, the first 3 we're going to learn in terms of how you compute it. Our roadmap for this afternoon involves knowing how to compute for population density, dispersion, and growth, and what do they mean or what do they describe in the population. Let's start with PD. PD, or population density, has 2 formulas, right? It depends on what type of species you're observing. So if it's terrestrial, animals, immobile, you can talk about total population over area. But, say for example, if you try to describe a school of fish, maybe, you would have to go for the total population divided by volume. Clear ba?
Yes, teacher.
What? Kindly compute. The following organisms live on a 1,000 square foot island. 50 squirrels, 30 bushes, and 20 trees. Using this information, determine population and population density for the different species. Solve it now and give me your answer.
0.03 ang
Answer?
1.3 scale. 0.0. Ay, add pa sila ka. 0.1. 0.1. Sa top, sa tumaba yun. 0.05. 0.03 lang. 0.03.
What are the given units?
Hi, for the different species measures.
Again, question. Go back to your problem.
For the different species,
Teacher, do you have an answer?
Yeah.
Sure, for the population density of the squirrels, sure, is 0.05. For the 30 bushes, sure, is 0.03. And for the 20 trees, sure, is 0.02.
Who among you solved it by adding everything? Dead. Eliminated. What was the definition? Your population is the number of organisms of the same kind. Pare-parehan ba ang squirrel, bushes, at trees? No. Sabi na nga ba? May the same mistake. Isn't it that I was also asking for your population density, even the population for the different species present? Are you being line. Diba? It's a common mistake. Do not go for that mistake again. So since we're talking about population, iba-ibang population per species. Because then again, these are members of the same kind. And you definitely, dito may parehas, squirrels, police, and monkeys. So, solving, here are your answers. What's the unit teacher? So how do you read that?
Feet squared.
Over and per feet.
Feet over, mag-smile na.
0.05 feet.
How do you read that?
0.03 per
Something something.
square foot.
Then,
Per
Example, sir. 0.05 per feet. Feet tiles.
0.05 per square feet.
6, 5, 4,
Fantastic
3,
square.
2, 1. Wala na yun. Wala na. What happened?
Foot socks.
Over, per foot square, per foot square.
There's no question in saying it as per square foot, right? How do you read that?
Per foot.
Over
Per square foot.
What does per square foot mean?
0.05 squirrels per square foot.
Exactly. Did I answer your question?
I forgot.
Did I answer your question now?
0.05 per square.
See, remember, you're counting the total
Per square feet?
population. So, population of what? Alam na naman 0.05 kangaroos na nag-solve ka o squirrels. Diba? But, what I am more concerned about is not if you know how to press your calculator, because this one is easy. Explain what these numbers mean.
Sure, kada 1,000 nga feet square, sure, kaya try ta ka
Okay, tapos, oh, well, he's really, he is presenting
sure,
a
sure.
practical
kada
explanation.
feet kaya 0.0.
What's the significance of a 0.03?
There are chances na zero.
Choose the answer.
Possibilities.
Chances
Bonita,
are,
kay nahulog.
chances
Dali.
are for every square foot there's 0.05 squirrels.
See? Because you cannot appreciate it. Kaya nga, di ba, you were practically asking me earlier, saan ba yung unit on a picture? So you have to go back what exactly you're solving. Isn't it that you're solving for these different organisms per square footage? So ibig sabihin, if there's a 0.05 squirrel per square foot, what does that mean?
Sir, what?
What does that mean? Possible ba na 0.05 of a squirrel?
May chance, sure. Kanang a square
The
foot, sure, kaya
population
ay
is
squirrel.
not dense, considering 0.05 lang per square foot.
Diba? If you come to think about it, I'll pick up on what Whitey had said, no? There is a chance that in the entire square footage of that island, naakay makita. It's not a total zero. It's a different story when you say zero, right? 0 per square footage. Then since there's a value, then there is a possibility of finding that organism. However, let's not limit it to that. Well, how else can it be interpreted? What are the meaning? Okay, so what's the significance? This is what I want you to lean more on. Looking at the values, you may also interpret it as likely there's one squirrel for every 20 square feet.
0.05 is 20.
Where does 20 come from?
Where does 20 come from?
1,000 divided by 0.
0.05 is 20.
Times?
20.
Y times 20.
I want equal 100.
Exactly. So if you want to appreciate the value of per organism of that kind, you can simply deduce na, if I cannot appreciate a 0.05, maybe you can appreciate that there is at least one squirrel on the average, one squirrel per, how big is the area? 20.
Karang pa ka gets. 0.05.
Diba? Per 20 square foot, because a 0.05
Para
is
ma-one-third.
unlikely and not. So para ma-1, to have a guarantee nga, how much diya? If it's just 0.05, Meaning, there's lesser chances to find at least one squirrel within 1 square foot, right? So that means one squirrel requires an area of at least or an average of 20 square feet. Huh? You just simply go for the value of 1. So how do you make
1 divided by
1? Diba? Nakuha. Nakagugot so far. See? Pag wala, okay na yun na. You have to ask. Hindi understand.
Para
why.
mag-guarantee ni mo nga nice
You
squirrel.
want to appreciate at least a per entity, per organism value, so you have to make that value of 0.05 to 1. How do you do that? Para ma-1 siya, multiplied by 20. Ang sa silong, what you do in the numerator, it's 20 times over and you per 20 square feet. Your bushes generally, like what Ray had said earlier, well, technically, sure, based on the story, it's just 30 bushes for the entire 1,000 square foot. Pwede siya. Very plain and simple, very straightforward. Or for the trees, you would require around 50 square foot per one.
Sure, ano wala in the proportion to 1 bushel?
What do you mean wala in proportion? These are different ways of analyzing your data.
0.02.
So it's not just one specific interpretation. And nag-solve lang po, 0.05 mo
Or at least
kasi
guaranteed na na,
0.05
you
mo.
should you know
Or
1.
if you're asked to interpret what that data means, then you see that there is more than one way of doing it. Right? So kung bali-bali mo, at least dili mo, kung ilo.
Sure, pero nga na, sure, ang nagulay siya ang bushes, sure.
Ha?
Bushes are 30 bushes in the island ng uban, sure, kay
Again,
first
what I'm
one.
saying is you can look at it or interpret it like so. You can even say, teacher, in the entire 1,000 square foot island are 50 squirrels. Does that make it wrong? Exactly. So
So-
apart from solving, these
Tam-
are different ways of interpreting your data.
So tama po, sure, nga, naay, ano, sure, 50 squirrels sa island, sure.
Oo. But then again, if you're basing it on your computation, at least you know the logic of what these values are. Okay? Let's talk about growth rate. Growth rate may be influenced by two types of limiting factors. Your density dependent versus your density independent limiting factors. Take note that they limit or cut down the increase in the population size. So they are generally, if you're going to recall our discussion yesterday, collectively, there are also called factors such as biotic and abiotic factors. That classification naman does not base itself on its limiting power but the nature of it being a factor. For example, prey and predator relationship, presence or absence of a mate, number of a mate, all of these are related to the day-to-day or living standards of the organism. So, mo siya as biotic factors, living. Abiotic, non-living. So, you're talking about characteristics of the environment naman where the organism is found thriving in. Now, those biotic and abiotic factors may also limit a population. So in terms of its limiting capacity, there are two types. It's density dependent versus density independent. So it's not rocket science. Go back to the definition. Density dependent. Does the population density influence its limiting factor or not?
Yes.
Density dependent mentioned.
Yes.
Yes. What does that mean? These factors, circumstances, or situations limit the population growth depending on whether the population is big. Oftentimes, that's the case. If the population is big, that is the only time wherein this particular factor is causing or therefore have its limiting effect. For example, we're talking about biotic factors here in general. So they may try to limit resources or therefore emphasize the carrying capacity. But carrying capacity, maximum number of organisms that a specific environment can support equally or efficiently without without having to sacrifice any of the organisms. Their ceiling pa siya. If you go beyond that, organisms die. That's population crash or die back. No? Munang pinaka-limit. So for example, our supply for food, is that biotic or abiotic in nature? Diba biotic kasi kinakonsume. Halimbawa, I am a mother of 21 children. Wow.
Grabe.
Do not ask how I was able to. Yeah, so 21 children. Halimbawa lang. For example, my budget for the entire month would be 3 sacks of rice. Will that supply of rice be considered a density-dependent limiting factor if, say for example, I will entertain less than or more than 21? Halimbawa, 3 sacks of rice for 1 month for me and my 3 kids. Would that be a limiting factor? Yes or no? Would that limit the population to grow?
Yes.
3 sacks of rice for 1 month for me and my 3 children. Will it limit?
Hindi ko alam na.
Ha? Will it limit the population, meaning me and my 3 kids? No. No. How about if I have 3 sacks of rice for 3 months to 36 children?
No.
Oh my God.
Will it
Yeah,
limit?
yes.
Yes.
Yes. Do you get the picture? It does not cause its limiting effect on a population if the population is small. It will cause it if the population is huge. Hence the name density dependent. However, factors or what we call the situations wherein it limits the number of organisms living in that population no matter what the size. For example, Nipiling ba tsunami hitting Japan, what prefecture it will hit?
No.
Dire-diretso yun, di ba? Regardless of the population or the population size. That is density independent limiting factor. By all means, it will limit the number of organisms in that area, and it does not depend on whether the size is big or small. By nature, they are all your abiotic factors. More on the environmental side. Are you getting the picture?
Yes, teacher.
So, let's take a look at how AJ,
Chismosa in the back.
ano si Kag Smile?
May
Sino
kagkat-
yan? Naka, pag yung cellphone na yan, di related sa science, bantay ha. My floor, my time. Ano yan?
Hindi ko ganun, sir.
Basa dami, basa dami.
Will limit the population growth regardless of the population density.
Ganon.
Ganon.
Basta na yung mga I love you exponential every day. Bantay ha. Seriously speaking, we only have 1 more session for discussion because after that, on Friday is compre. I know not Friday,
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow is your comprehensive exam. 1 last discussion on Friday. Monday of next week is your long test.
Teacher.
Ay, sorry, Thursday, Monday mo, no? Dire-diretso mo din. Thursday. Okay, moving on. So when you talk about growth rate, you think about the factors that can affect the population's growth. So, you simply, before you are able to assess specifically if there's a growth or not, you need to review the the factors that influence the size. For example, birth and immigration, death and emigration. So notice the movement is inbound to add more into the population. That's your green side. So at least you picture it out now. And then the ones on the red font are basically the ones that remove organisms from the population. So what do we need as data to identify growth rate? First, find the change in the population size. That's delta N. How do we identify the change in population size? Get the data for birth, death, immigration, and emigration. Check dayon. Data for, you need to find the difference between the birth and the death, number of births and deaths, plus the difference between immigration and emigration. Then you find your change in population size. From there, you can start computing delta n, or change in population size, divided by initial population. Clara?
Yes, sir.
Kan ay lutuan na?
Yes, teacher.
Kay mamiya na lang ba? O di nga ba? Isudsado, di mo umiya grade 10 forever.
Di na
Masugot mo.
Okay lang, sure.
Well,
Alam si you.
well, I suggest you can change. Are you?
My alma mater.
Hindi na siya mga solve na.
Wala pa ako practice.
Huwag ka na mag-practice. It's irrelevant.
Put on the
Mind you, I've been in Xavier for 4 years, but I did not ever memorize their even until college ako na memorize Corpus Christi. Going back, time is solved. Solved na yun. There is a population of 10 rabbits. One of the 10 rabbits gave birth to 3 more. 1 death was noted. 1 more rabbit transferred into the population while it left. What is the growth rate of the population? Wag na. Stay here na lang.
Immigration ang isulod, di ba?
Oo.
No, no, negative na nanin. Immigration kay igawas ka sa Philippines.
Namatay. 3 ang anak. 9 sa namatay.
One, it is one. Initial population is one.
Yes. Sorry, sila. Answer.
How do you get NDI?
Sure.
N is initial.
Wow.
Kanang-
Get your
kani,
comprehensive grade on that answer.
Initial N and N. Asa di ka nang asa mo
Sure
pa?
na.
N is 10.
10?
Oo.
Answer.
0.1 ako.
0.11. What is your answer again, Mark? 0.1.
0.1.
0.1. Sige ba 0.1?
Ay, ang N kay 10. Kay 10 rabbit.
Oo.
Answer?
0.1 sure.
So again, what's your formula for growth rate?
Birth minus
Change of delta N over N.
Okay, correct. So muna siya. But when you have to solve for your change in population, your formula would then be,
birth minus death.
okay, difference between
Difference between birth and death.
Immigration
plus
and immigration.
the difference of immigration and emigration.
So, delta N's value is,
0.1.
so your formula now is 1.
I want the one
Your
teacher.
final answer is 110. Or if you want to present it in percentage form, your answer
Ay,
is
Kira, your face is-
10% growth.
Kira,
So yes, congratulations.
thank you. I think
Are
isa
you
po
following?
To the new places, yeah, teacher.
Easy, yeah.
Alright.
Very easy.
Sure, ang delta
I
and
want-
1 per me. Delta and 1 per me.
Emigrate.
No.
Igawas sa Philippines.
Depends on what values there are.
Ang high. Sulod.
Delta N represents the change.
Alright.
Ay, musulod.
No mark? Clear?
Ang ay,
As
musulod.
long as you understand why the formula is like so, you can solve any problem related to population size.
Say 1 and
Diba? Do you understand why we have to find the sum of the difference between these four?
Yes, teacher.
Because they all involve what? Movement and presence of organisms within the area. Okay, moving along. Let's talk about population dispersion.
Hello.
Okay? Sige. Population dispersion is mainly to categorize the value as the value of dispersion being clumped random or uniform. Clump meaning clustered or group. Random is when the distribution is fairly unpredictable. May nagkumpulan, may nagbulag-bulag. And then uniform when there is an even distribution across the space. The other term for uniform is, random is regular. So how do we solve for your population dispersion? And by the way, before that, appreciate that when you talk about population dispersion, it tells you more of the characteristic of your organism. For example, ano bang organism would require, this is thinking big ha, halimbawa, when you want to establish a set of rules or to lobby a certain law to protect a certain endangered species, part of your reference would be, unsa na siya klaseng organism? Is it a lone type of organism, like the whales, and how much space they need, right? Or is it a social organism? Or is it behaving as if they're clustered like your wolves, your school of fish, your elephants, diba they're clustered
Lions.
together? So based on that, you appreciate now the characteristic of the animal and therefore the population of this animal in the greater scheme of things. Clear?
Yes, teacher.
So, then you would also appreciate, kung inana ilang behavior, inana ilang distribution, what are their risks? Siyempre, pag kumpulan sila, then you would know that they're at risk for diseases or infection. So, halimbawa, if you're talking about a forest, and there's a certain species that's prone to aphid infestation, say for example, hindi siya pwede magtapad-tapad. Those of you who have farms, diba? Hindi siya pwede magtapad-tapad. Why? Magtakod-takod siya. So what happens to your yield? Halimbawa, coconuts are prone to a certain type of aphid attack. So what happens to that? The trees, the leaves will be damaged, the yield will be affected. So kung ikaw ang naikuprasan, diba, na ay coconut na, grabe naman, plantation, farm, you will consider the spacing and how you're going to position or plant your coconuts. So, dili siya basta lang, hindi na ito magtanong-tanong ko din. Dili ha? So, there is a need for you to solve. Okay? Now, so, this version reflects that too. Let's take a look at the following characteristics for all three. Aggregate is also called clump. Random or regular. I hope you're taking note of that. So, yes. Okay pa ba? Madali na lang to. My goodness. It's like the end of science B already and it's a very easy topic.
Hello, Kira.
Oh, sure.
It's okay.
Okay na? Moving along. So, population dispersion. There are some methods like the quadrant method that scientists or researchers employ. Because if you study a certain population, it's not always true that you can take data of the whole population. Sometimes it's impossible to count. Right? Halimbawa, I would want to study what species of algae would bloom in the shores of Misamis Forest. So meaning ihapon dito. East to West Municipality, kaya?
True.
Gikan sa Bulbul is really just gamay gani, right? Diba? Kaya from, what's the end part of the western side? What's the very last? Is it Naakno? Naawan?
Hinitaw.
Naawan, Hitagong, pinaka-last. And then, ang pinaka-last there sa east is Magsaysay, before Himoog, right? Kaya na?
Side.
Oh, see,
It's
so
the location.
that's the very last.
Suicide.
Suicide.
So, it's quite impossible. Ha? So, what you do, you only do sampling. So, some
That is a place.
researchers
Ah,
employ
pinaka-east
your
sa ano.
quadrant method to get data. What's that quadrant we're talking about? Basically, it tries to estimate the size of the population using a quadrant, meaning a fixed size, like this one here in your lower left. It's measured. You make it uniform across all. So that part, each box is a quadrant. For example, what if that researcher would identify in this particular plot of land what type of grass grow? So if you notice, quadrant number 1, this particular species of grass grows in it. In quadrant 2i, there's no grass at all, so the data could be 0. The next naman, there are 3. They get the picture? Everything that's found inside the box or the quadrat that we call is where you source your data from. So, you may also think of the example earlier as this. Halimbawa, this is the shoreline, and you want to have, you want to find what particular species of algae grow. So, if you notice, sa entire strip of the coastline, naiban portions na no data. Notice this? 0, 0. The other ones, 0 or naiban dili. Then you identify what type. And then you'd appreciate na, in a given particular space, assuming that this is the entire space you want to study, this is the probability of finding this particular species, this particular type of organism. And that data is what you're going to solve or use to get the dispersion. So, if you are going to find the value for your dispersion or population dispersion or PD, you will have to solve for the sample variance over the sample mean. I am not talking about the population variance or the population mean. Lahit sila. Understood?
Kada small, kada
Quadrat.
different siya nga organism or same organism.
If you're going to study a specific organism, kailangan you will count. But if your study would want to identify what species and how many or how much of that is found in this area, pwede ka kani nga species, inani ang number. For this particular species, inani siya. Pwede siya inani. Depends on how you're going to research it. So what's important is that you have a uniform way of finding samples. Okay, the point of the quadrant method is only to get a sample data, not the population. Here, can you see this? You'll count the entire stretch of the whole lot. So, here are the values or the symbols you'll encounter. So, S squared is basically your sample variance. The square there is basically the square or your standard deviation.
Mga taas na sila formula.
Oy, kaya yan. And then your X bar is your mean or your L. Ay, oy. Kung nagsabol siya, meaning okay kasi nagagamit.
Ungroup.
Dira, sample lang.
Example.
Okay, so these are the values take note. Kaya press doon, pandak-ilak at ismakan.
Allah.
Kaya nga, di ba? Basta doon ang die on mean, okay? Look at the values. If the value of your population dispersion is less than 1, it is categorized as uniform. If the value of your population dispersion is equal to 1, it's random or regular. If it has a value of greater than 1, it's aggregated or clustered. So that is why you have to solve it and then categorize it based on the criteria. Claro?
Sure. Regular is another name for random.
Yeah. Let's go regular. Random. Okay na? Let's try. In your long test and in the quarter exams, you will be given a table with data already. So you're not going to fish for data anymore. Okay? So it is presented as quadrats. Okay, take note of this. Kindly solve. What is the spatial dispersion of dandelions over an area of land? Refer to the gathered data from after using the quadrant method as a sampling method. So you have 8 quadrats in total. So the first quadrats have, it has 13. Then the next one is 14. Some even have zeros and ones. Looking at the data and without solving, categorize. What's it? Diba? sometimes you don't have to really solve it immediately. Sometimes you just have to look at the data logically. 913, 914, 913, then all of a sudden there is 0 and 1. You're likely to think that organisms are huddled together. Imagine na ganyan. This is the entire plot. There are, in the first quadrant, this is 13, 914, 914 kabuo, 913 ay wala, naiusahin isa. So you'd rather think of baka random or clock. So what do? You solve. Then you solve. Sige, let's see if our hypothesis is correct. Let's solve first. Which one is easier to solve? Variance or mean? Naturally, no? You have to solve the
Average, sure.
So basically, you have to add. No? You just simply have to add all of the data for every data set and then divide it by the number of quadrants. So you have 15 plus 14 plus 14, etc. divided by 8. You get an average of 7. Then you need to solve for your variance. Okay? In order to solve for the variance, you still have to solve for the standard deviation. Then square it. Diba? That is the sum of the squared square differences of your data. So it looks like this. Right? 13 minus 7 squared plus 14 minus 7 squared, and so on and so forth, all divided by the total number of quadrats minus 1.
Pwede lang gamitin itong table na ako gigamit sa math. Like itong table sa math. Ano, x minus may t-shirt.
Pwede na lang siya. But we're not going to look into the nitty-gritty of those things. That's the reason why I asked you to get your calculator.
Ay, actually, same siya sa lesson.
That's
Okay,
standard
13.
deviation.
Yung minus
Polong, butang na to, x minus x minus 10 square dahil add ka lang sa
Ay, sure.
square root of ano dahil
Ay na, kanila
M
na
minus
mamamihan.
1.
Don't worry. I'm
Sure.
not going to overkill.
Sure na ko'y question, sure. Sa mga sure kay magbutang pa may summation of inana, sure, pwede ka nang i-total na mo ang nasa taas, sure?
Nak, I'm only asking for the sum of the square differences. I-square na ako nang ask for any other data that you're using for math. Doon ha, doon lang, average in your variance. Your variance is the square of your standard deviation. So, you should arrive at an answer of 48.57 for your sample variance. You have to divide that by 7, you get a 6.94. What's a 6.94? Greater than, lesser than, equal to 1. So if it's greater, what's the category? Clustered is practically clumped. So it's clumped, random, or uniform. Clumped or aggregated, random or regular, and then uniform. Sorry, uniform and regular. Okay? So mag-solve that. Those, kaya as much as possible, the physical calculator that you're using in the long test, I favor that you use the same calculator for your exams. Because even if I have given you the link in the module, the link to a free scientific calculator app, I would still not allow you to use that application on the actual quarter exam. Okay? So scientific calculators at that. So how do we arrive with that answer? What time are you supposed to end?
4:30, teacher.
Ha? Of course not.
Oh!
Ayaw, true. Dali, ano, variance over mean. Okay. I'll think about it. Okay. Calculators first. Let's see. Calculators first. Naman, clear out your memory. Reset. Shift. Others would have a shift 9 because 9 has LR or here. Shift 9. Na? You have to clear everything.
Shift 9.
Shift 9.
Shift 9.
Yes, and then
Set
number
up.
3, then equal sign, you clear everything, it will compute a different value, especially if it's an older calculator.
Sir, shift 9.
3, equal sign is there.
Ano daw? Shift
Clear
9.
na? Yes. Equal sign.
Balik ka daw. Shift.
Wait. If our calculators that are of older version, look for a reset button at the back. Dati i-press sa likod. A reset.
Calculator ko sa imong panahon.
Tumak mo na it's just very durable.
Okay na?
Sure.
Tawa pa, di ba na naman?
Kaya pagkita na sa pakita. Ngayon siya.
Meron din yung hindi ka papan ka kasi.
Kasi nag-data ka na sa GPT ka ba naman?
Okay na? Pwede mo na kasi
Hindi. Oo.
Okay, then change your mode to statistics. Shift mode, others would have to press mode lang. Asa our star? Number 3. Okay na? Sige, wait lang. Let's wait for the other.
Sure, wako yung statistics. Sure, it's a meaning.
Choose that.
Sure, what for? We cannot afford
Okay,
it.
one dash bar.
Sure, magulat pa ko.
Okay na?
Balik na para sa ikaw regular.
Okay na? Okay na? Okay, the others whose calculators are like
Ay, Risa to Shakira.
Naisa, older for this. After stop or XD, please key in the data of the quadrant. For example, 13m plus. And you see an m is equal to 1. That means that's the first data. Then you type the next number again, 14m plus. N is equal to 2. Do that until you get an n is equal to 8. That's the older version. Okay, ayaw na. Kani siya, manana. You finish it first. Yeah. All the numbers. Number equals sign equals and shift. This one shift. One dash time. 13 equals sign finish until so this one.
Power
we
that you can
have-
also times by
You see, your voice. I know.
Nada rin ang idea.
Dahil naglalula. Mananong should have 8.
Sir.
Ito rin after.
Or this one is your sample standard.
Francis, nadunggan ka ka sa may day.
Si Aaron nagtapos. Ulog. Ayun, tapos.
Nasa ilalim ko.
Ulog ko bulog bro. Si Aaron nagtapos. Kuya, sa tapos.
Oh, na. Oh, na. Natalo mga idea.
Diligin ako. Si Julie ang naguna.
Wala, Francis.
Square this, you get your variance. You want to get
Bago magunya ko yun. Francis.
Uy, laban na rin yung mga basura.
Mark.
Apoy! Wala na mo sa batos. Next time.
Diligin ako. Si Julie ang naguna kayo.
Paras kaya sama.
Man rin ko pag-stand. Francis, asay may sapatos. Francis, asay may sapatos. Rada iya ba di? Rada iya ba di? Rada iya ba di? Franz. Hello. Ay, sapatos.
Hindi ako sa
Kaya sa mga